Today we descend into Comera to look at the Kabals, cults and Covens that your twisted killers can be drawn from. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we're going to go through the extensive list of Kabals, cults and Covens available to the Drukhari army list, talk a bit about the background and lore behind each one of them, all their unique rules and how they perform in-game. Drukhari really have it particularly easy with army construction these days. They can take 3 different patrol detachments for essentially no additional cost, so they're really actively encouraged to run multiple different detachments and utilise more than one of these choices. You can also mix all 3 in a Real Space Raiders detachment if you prefer to go that way. Few armies have it quite as easy when mixing and matching. Strength-wise, loosely between the 3 of them, I'd argue that maybe the Witch Cults do seem to be the top at the moment in terms of unit strength. Succubi, Witches, Hellions and Reavers are all great choices, and pretty awesome things to have springing out of Raiders to mince the enemy. Kabals are great for fighting Archons, some cheap Kabalites to hold objectives, and they're often one of the best choices for using Raiders with. I'd say just maybe generally weakest of the 3 might be the Homunculus Covens. For me their units are just a little bit less standout or auto-include than some of the rest, though Dark Technomancers and Liquefy Guns in particular is crazily strong, and the Dark Creed have some very powerful options. In any case, let's jump straight in, starting with the Kabals, go through their lore, their in-game choices, and how strong I think they are relatively. First up we have the biggest baddest Kabal of the lot, the Cabal of the Black Heart. These guys are the strongest in Comera, a vast sprawling and corrupt organisation, headed none other than Asdrubal Vect, who if the Drukhari have a single faction leader, in the background he's pretty much going to be it. His machinations, schemes and agents are everywhere in the Dark City, and to cross him is to court with death. With quite such a monopoly on power, the Black Heart have their fingers in many pies, and with their vast resources they often recruit lesser Kabals to the cause, and have strong ties with Witches, Homunculus Covens, and employ a great amount of alien mercenaries. As Drukhari go, they maybe represent a fairly combined arms approach. In-game, I'd say that the Black Heart are perhaps the strongest out of any of the Dark Eldar Kabals. Their obsession grants numerous benefits. They get extra power from pain, meaning that they can advance and charge right from turn 1, they get +1 leadership, they get to reroll 1 single hit roll every time their unit makes an attack, and that's a really nice benefit in combination with Raider Dark Lancers, and if their Archon is the Archon of a Real Space Raid, he can also grant his rerolls to other things such as Scourges. Lots of things to like about that, the hit reroll and the power from pain are maybe the main 2. Their stratagem, Agents of Vect, is vastly changed from previously. You just use it whenever your opponent uses a stratagem you think they'll use again, and then that stratagem will cost more command points later in the game, though you can't use it on the CP reroll. Pretty useful, might be handy on a Space Marine player with transhuman physiology perhaps. The Warlord trait Labyrinthine Cunning is also really quite a nice one for a bit of command point farming, and their Writ of the Living Muse is a solid buffing relic, giving you reroll hits and wounds of 1. Arguably out of the Drukhari Codex, the Cabal of the Black Heart might be the single strongest Cabal. They are seeing a lot of play in tournaments right now. Next up we have the Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue. Backstabbing and duplicity is their very nature. They are well known for their empty promises and are often just as dangerous to their allies as they are to the enemy. Their rivals will often find themselves on the forefront of any fight that they're in, saving the Poisoned Tongue's strength, and their warriors are known to employ especially deadly venoms, which they employ when making war. Lady Malice, one of the Drukhari characters that had previous rules in the game, is a notable member. In-game, their poison weapons get a bit better to wound. Splinter rifles will be wounding on a 3+, and they also cause -1 combat attrition if you do suffer any wounds with poison weapons. It's far simpler and a bit more limited than Black Hearts to be honest, but basically this means if you want to focus on damage dealing with splinter fire, then this Cabal is perhaps the best. It could be pretty intimidating to have a whole bunch of venoms with splinter cannons, plus a bunch of Cabalite warriors in the back, all spitting away wounds that wound anything on a 3+, provided their target isn't a vehicle. I'd say for raw strength of the Cabal, perhaps their biggest strength is actually their stratagem. Insidious Misdirection costs 2 command points, and it allows you to redeploy 3 units before the game, or actually put them into strategic reserve if you feel like it. This means that you could potentially hide everything out of line of sight turn 1, and if you happen to get first turn, you could put a few choice units out front and centre to better attack the enemy straight away, or get into really good positions for a turn 2 strike. It's really handy to have around, to have the option of capitalising on going first and second. Otherwise, I'm not enormously enthused about their trait or relic. Their trait gives a 5+ feel no pain against mortal wounds, and nearby troops don't suffer the penalty for combat attrition. And their relic is a soul-seeking splinter pistol, 18-inch, 2 shots, wounds on 2s, AP -2 and damage D3, plus you can snipe characters with it. It's not bad, but is it really any better than a blast pistol? In terms of strength, I'd say that they're relatively solid. They can do their poison synergy, though honestly that stratagem for redeploying at the start of the game might just be the most valuable thing that they bring to the table. Next up we come to the Obsidian Rose, who in the background control an enormous amount of weapon shops and arms suppliers in Commorragh. Their Archon Aestrachromis meticulously drills these warriors, with no less than utter perfection being acceptable and minor mistakes being punished by death. The Kabalite warriors of the Obsidian Rose can conduct every raid with drilled perfection because they know the consequences of failure. In game they're pretty powerful at shooting, as you'd expect. Every time they attack they get a single wound reroll, arguably a tiny bit more powerful than the Cabal of the Black Heart's hit reroll, as when you reroll a failed wound you already know that you've hit. They also get a plus 6-inch range to any non-grenade or pistol weapons, so could potentially have things like Kabalite warriors with splinter axe cruising around at 30-inch range mowing things down out of raiders. The rest of their choices maybe aren't quite as strong again though. Their stratagem's a bit niche, with failure is not an option. For one command point, fleeing models get to shoot once, and if they kill anything then they don't run. Very rare that that's going to come off, I think. Their warlord trait gives you +1 strength to the Archon's weapons, and their relic gives them a 3+ armor save and -1 to hit in melee, none of which are really outstanding compared with the standard options. For me, I don't think that these guys really quite compare with the Blackheart. Their obsession isn't too bad, I guess maybe for a Cabal that's really loading up on the shooty weapons. Finally, for the big named Cabals, we have the Cabal of the Flayed Skull. These guys are a brutal militaristic Cabal, second only in power to the Blackheart. Their Archon Vrask Maladrak is particularly infamous for scalping the enemies on their defeat and flaying the very skin off their faces. These particular brutal murderers rule the Poisoned Crown in Commorragh. It's one of the highest spires of the city, and is a great mooring point for fighters, bombers, and various Drukhari skimmers. When the Flayed Skull make war, it's typically alongside a great number of airborne vehicles. In game they are particularly good at fighting from skimmers. The shooting attacks on any fly units ignore light cover, and they also get +2-inch movement on anything with fly. For me, compared with the rest, it is a bit meh. Light cover's perhaps not that big a deal compared with 8th edition. It'll be helpful for splinter weapons, but high AP things such as lances don't really care anyway. The +2-inch movement is certainly handy, getting a bit of extra speed is good. I'm just not sure it's quite as strong as the rest of the options. Otherwise, their 1 command point stratagem, Masters of the Shadowed Sky, gives them +1 to hit against fly units, or +2 to hit against aircraft. Could be pretty good when used on something like a Void Raven bomber or maybe a Ravager. Their Warlord trait makes them a little bit fightier, +1 strength and +1 attack. Could potentially be quite fun in combination with the Gym Blade, getting the Archon up to strength 5, and their relic is the Obsidian Veil, a 4+ invul which helps the Archon stay alive even when his Shadow Field fails. I think I'd argue out of the current options, probably the Flayed Skull are the weakest of the big four. I don't really think their obsession or the other bits are particularly outstanding. You can make custom Cabals as well, and you can most certainly make your own too. One that I found was the Cabal of the Wraith kind. They're a Cabal who rule the pleasure city of Orithilan, turned into a horror city by Asdrabale Vect when they thwarted him, and they were one of the Cabals that helped out the struggling craft world of Iandan and helped it repulse an Orc war. With custom Cabal choices, you don't get any unique stratagems, relics or warlord traits. You get 2 choices off the list, or to pick one of the 2 all-consuming obsessions, where you only get a single choice. Perhaps some of the most interesting ones are Toxin Crafters. That's one where you get exploding 6s with poison weapons, and you get to reroll wound rolls of 1 with them. Generally that combo adds up to even a little bit more damage output even than the Poison Tongue with splinter weapons, and has the bonus that it works on any Poison 2+ weapons that you happen to have in the Cabal. You don't get the -1 combat attrition, but if literally all you want is splinter damage output, then this might be a better choice. It is a shame to lose that very nice redeployment stratagem though. Another interesting combo is the combination of Merciless Razorkin and Torturous Efficiency. Again, that one's a general shooting buff. Any 6s to hit with splinter weapons get an extra hit, and anything that wounds the enemy on the roll of a 6 gets an extra AP -1. Sometimes an AP -1 might be better than just re-rolling wound rolls, particularly against very heavily armoured foes with a 3+ or 2+ save. Finally, another one of the ones that you can choose that you could combine with something else is Dark Mirth. Maybe not the strongest, but I think it's quite fun. Basically, every time your opponent moves with a unit that's within 12 inches of one of yours, you roll a dice and on a 5+, they take a single mortal wound. Could potentially rack up to a bit of random scattered damage if you have a fair few units up close and personal. Generally though, I think that the best use of these custom Cabals is if you just really want to maximise splinter fire and you don't really care about anything much else. Moving along, let's jump into the witch cults. We'll start with the largest and most powerful, the cult of Strife. These murderous gladiators favour speed over strength and perfection of the gladiatorial arts in all their forms. They're presided over by Lilith Hesperax, who is no leader by scheming or politicking, unlike many of the other champions of the Drukhari. She has earned and maintains her reputation by simply being the best gladiator in the city, effortlessly besting others even without the aid of combat drugs. The cult of Strife have strong ties with the Black Heart and have recently pledged their allegiance to the Inari, and in times of need will deploy their strength to destroy the forces of chaos. They are one of the few named sub-factions with a special character in Lilith Hesperax herself, now reimagined in plastic from that Piety and Pain box. Though it has to be said her rules are a little bit sad. She can do a fairly okay job against light infantry and characters in melee, but she costs quite a lot more points than a standard succubus, most of which can comfortably outfight her when equipped with a warlord trait and a relic. Out of all the Drukhari units, she might sadly be one of the weakest choices. However, despite Lilith not being the best, I would say that the cult of Strife in general are by far the strongest witch cult that you can choose. Virtually every single competitive list seems to run them. This is in no small part thanks to that Warzone Charadon book, which gave them their own mini supplements, which means instead of having a single stratagem, trait and relic, they have 3 relics, 3 traits, and no less than 8 stratagems. Their obsession is kind of okay. They get to fight first, and they get a +1 to charge against unengaged foes, both of which are pretty good things when you deal all your damage in combat. They have multiple usable stratagems. For 2 command points they can fight again in the fight phase, always good if you need a second round of swinging to clear an enemy unit. For 2 command points you can re-roll wound rolls, either on a succubus or a big squad of witches that can certainly force through loads more damage. There's 1 command point to ignore Overwatch, and you have the option to give a Hecatrix a relic. They also have multiple usable warlord traits. Blood Dancer gets extra hits on 6s. Competitive Edge is perhaps the strongest one of the lot, allowing you to get a full extra attack every time you don't inflict damage with an attack. Pretty much guarantees a massive boost to the damage output, and there's also Master Executioner as well. Finally, they have a couple of very good relics. The Dark Lotus Toxin, which gives you +1 strength and damage, excellent in combination with Razor Flails, or Morvaine's Agonizer, which is a popular choice to give to Hecatrixes. If you get hit by it, then you can't fall back next turn. That could be really disruptive against a shooting unit that really wants to get out of the way. In general, the Cult of Strife are certainly a popular choice, incredibly strong, and a huge array of options from that supplement. Next up we come to the Cursed Blade, who are also known for their treachery. Must be a fairly common theme throughout Comera, I suspect. Within the ranks of the Cursed Blade, swift and brutal death is only a moment away, and many of its gladiators are armed with hidden darts, trinkets or razor flails that can kill a rival or supposed friend when it appears that no weapons are even present. This murderous environment allows only the strong to survive, and through brutal natural selection, the witches are some of the most fearsome in Comera. In-game, I'm a really big fan of the Cursed Blade's rules, and I really like the raw strength that the witches can get. Their obsession gives them +1 strength, getting them to strength 4 with those Hecatari blades, and it can allow you to use other things other than the +1 strength in combat, maybe giving them an extra attack each as well. On top of that, they have a really quite nice bounce-back mortal wound mechanic, where every saving roll of a 6 that they make in melee deals the enemy unit that they're in combat with a mortal wound. That could actually be legitimately scary for elite units if they're trying to carve through a squad of witches. Their stratagem's kind of interesting. For 1 command point, their shard bombs will allow them to fire 5 grenades that wound on a 2+. That could easily pay for itself if you're being charged by a horde. I've managed to switch the Warlord trait and relic here. The Warlord trait is getting a 4+ save to reflect the mortal wound rather than a 6, so maybe it might be good for 1 or 2 more, but ideally you don't want your Warlord taking too much damage in combat. And their relic allows them to try and take with them whoever killed them in close combat, where if they die in melee, you roll a dice and on a 2+ you deal a whopping d3+3 mortal wounds. That one is potentially quite scary, but does have the downside of your relic bearer actually having to get killed. You're probably going to be better with just the things that amp up the damage output in the first place, rather than when you die. In general though, I really quite like this one for the trait alone. It means their witch squads could be hitting with a massive 51 strength 4 AP-1 attacks for just 100 points, which is ridiculous, and their Hellions will be hitting on a strength 5 and either combining that with extra attacks or extra toughness. I've got to like the raw strength of this cult. Finally, for the named witch cults, we come to the Cult of the Red Grief. These are Skyborn Raiders and Reavers, witches who bound from transport to transport, only ever touching the ground briefly to deal a killing blow before bounding and soaring into the skies once more. They have a great number of Hellions and Reavers amongst their ranks, and typically their Raiders and Venoms will fly in close formation, a murderous wind of death that just sweeps the enemy army away. Their obsession allows them to reroll charges and gives them +2 to advance rolls, which could be really handy in combination with advance and charge. It means that even compared with other Drukhari, these guys are going to have an incredibly high threat range. In theory, in turn 2 onward, that's something like a 21-inch average charge range simply from witches on foot. Their stratagem, Athletic Aerialist, allows them to re-embark on a transport after fighting, and that could potentially be really annoying to the enemy. You could maybe have your witches rough up an enemy unit, and then provided your raider is close enough, you can get back in, and that beaten up enemy unit won't even be able to fight back after. Their Warlord trait is a bit more defensive. Hit rolls of 1 to 3 always miss this Warlord. I'm not really sure it's going to make the Succubus into any sort of survivable character though, so I'd likely skip that. But their relic on the other hand, the Bloodglaive, is really quite a nice one. Strength 5, AP -3 and damage 3. Stack that with a fighty Warlord trait and you've got another Succubus build that will kill near enough anything and be ridiculously efficient. Overall, again I'd say that they're very strong. Ridiculous charge range, a potentially very powerful aerialist stratagem, and the Bloodglaive allows you to hit very, very hard. Honestly, I think that you're spoilt for choices between the various witch cults. All of them have some massive benefits. Otherwise, like the Kabals, you can of course make custom witch cults of your own, again at the cost of stratagems, relics or warlord traits. To be honest, compared with the custom Kabals or Covens, I'm not quite as impressed. I just don't think that they really shape up to the excellent named ones that they have access to already. Maybe the two most interesting are those all-consuming obsessions. Berserk Fugue allows you exploding 6s to hit in melee, so it's a flat damage buff, and it also gives you a 5+ feel no pain against mortal wounds. It's not bad, but I think for raw damage dealing I'd rather go for Cursed Blade. Otherwise, Agile Hunters allows your Hypex to go a little bit faster, you get 3-inch movement rather than 2, and you also have +1 hit against Fly. Again, that can make for some very, very long charges turn 1, could be interesting in combination with Hellions or Reavers. Overall, I would rather go for one of the named ones, but it is fun to have some other options to mix it up, and there's plenty more ones that I haven't talked about. Finally, we come on to the Homunculus Covens, the sinister flesh necromancers of the Drukhari, and we'll start out with none other than the Prophets of Flesh. The Prophets are the most powerful of the Homunculus Covens, famed for their flesh crafters and experimenters, and often in the lore they're quite well known for abducting Xenos races and knitting them together into pain engine abominations. They are the Coven of Urian Rakarth, perhaps the most famous of all the homunculi, and he does have his own model in game, paying a few points over the standard homunculus to get the Master Homunculus upgrade and giving a +1 strength and leadership aura to his flesh creations. He's certainly an interesting pick if you are playing Prophets of Flesh, but it does lock you out of taking any specific relics or warlord traits on him, which is a bit of a downside. In game, their obsession makes the Prophets of Flesh exceedingly tough. Their multi-wound models and characters will regenerate 1 wound every command phase, so will slowly regrow some sustained damage, and also they kind of have a mini transhuman physiology special rule, where any attacks that are less than strength 8 will always fail to wound on the roll of a 1 to 3. Between those two, it certainly makes them more survivable, and that's no bad thing for things like racks, which are quite good durable objective holders. Their stratagem, Sins Writ Large, is a melee buff. You use it on a unit of racks or grotesques next to a homunculus, and they get to reroll all hit rolls for the fight phase. Could be really powerful on a bunch of grotesques with cleavers perhaps, and doubly so if they're also getting the +1 strength buff from Urian. Their trait, Diabolical Soothsayer, is far worse than it used to be. Now at the start of the game you just choose whether or not to have +1 toughness and wound, or +1 move and attack, neither of which are particularly meaningful buffs on the homunculus. Their relic though is absolutely outstanding. The Vexator Mask can prevent Overwatch and make a unit fight last within 3 inches, which is a really powerful ability to dominate the fight phase, as it means that all of your units that dogpile that unit should be able to strike first. A really handy option to have along alongside other Drukhari assault troops. Overall, I'd say that the Prophets are a pretty strong coven. A bit of extra toughness never hurts, the Vexator Mask is amazing, and they aren't too bad for mixing it up in melee either. Next up we come to the Dark Creed, who are basically the spooky scary homunculus coven even more than the rest. These guys are known to be the epitome of terror tactics, employing everything from phantasm grenades, holographic projectors, and nightmarish flesh servants, all of which serve to extract every ounce of delicious terror from their prey. The Dark Creed are particularly known to work well with mandrakes, who they employ to spread terror and discord throughout the opponent's ranks before closing in with the foe. Their obsession is a morale debuff one, which is usually quite bad, but I think in the Drukhari army it's perhaps more relevant than anywhere else. Nearby units get put at -1 leadership and -1 combat attrition, which means that they're both more likely to fail morale tests and then run away when they do, and that stacks incredibly easy with the cheap upgrade of Grizzly trophies for another -2 leadership. Even fairly sturdy troops will have a very good chance of suffering morale casualties. On top of that, they also get +1 to hit against any enemies that are lower leadership than they are, so that's often going to put them at fairly good effect at close range. Between these guys, Grizzly trophies, and things like Phantasm grenade launchers or Incubi making you fight last, Drukhari really seem to be able to go quite a long way to making leadership shenanigans matter. Their stratagem's a bit underwhelming. It's a 2 or 3 command point one to ignore Lookout Sir. I guess it could perhaps be most useful if we're using it on a big unit of Talos to snipe down a character. Maybe you could get quite a reliable snipe off if you had a load of Heat Lancers or something. I think that perhaps the single strongest thing that the Dark Creed bring though might be their Warlord trait, which is Fear Incarnate, and it's quite a powerful and annoying debuff to stop the enemy scoring points. At the end of your movement phase, you pick a unit within 9 inches, you roll 3d6 versus their leadership, which might be lowered due to the Dark Creed or Grizzly trophies. If you beat them, then they get no obsec, and they also can't do any actions either. Could be pretty handy for doing a classic Drukhari move of throwing some fast obsec models on an objective to snatch it away from the enemy. Finally, they also have a Relic Needle pistol, Spirit Sting. 3 shots, poison 2+, AP-3, and ignores invuls. Not terrible, but not typically game-changing either. Overall, I would say that the Dark Creed is quite a strong pick. Their leadership debuff is actually quite useful in Drukhari, and Fear Incarnate could potentially land you a fair few more victory points. Lastly, for the named Covens, we have the Coven of 12. These have some quite fun backstory. They're made up of 12 homunculi, each the masters of their deadly arts, and if you want to join this murderous club, then you have to dispose of one homunculus in such a gruesome manner as they're not able to regenerate from it. I believe that they do always keep a seat open though for Mr. Urian Rakarth, just in case he should ever wish to join them. The Coven of 12 specialise in close combat, many of them acting as Scarlet Epicureans, who have a taste for delivering personal death to the enemy up close. The Coven's racks are often sent into battle flayed of their skin, all the better to expose raw nerve endings to a galaxy of horrors and sensation, hence their disturbing distinctive look of exposed muscle. In game, all this carnage does translate to a decent buff in melee. The melee of all their warriors is improved by AP-1, so everything from Racks to Grotesques and Talos will be a lot more scary. For objective camping Racks, they can also shoot while performing actions as well, which I guess could be situationally handy if you're wanting to blaze away with Ossifactors while also raising some banners. Their stratagem pulls out a little bit more damage out of a homunculus. If he's in combat with an enemy character, you can surprise them with a hidden death machine. Roll a dice, and on a 2+, they take D3 mortal wounds. On a 6, they take a massive D3+3 mortal wounds. I think the idea is that they might do a bit of damage to the enemy first, and then this might finish them off. Perhaps a bit situational though, you have to be up against a character that your homunculus can feel comfortable engaging, and a lot of them do tend to be quite threatening in 40k. Their trait gives them -1 damage, and their relic is the Flensing Blade, a strength user AP-2 damage D3 poison 2+ weapon that also does damage 3 against characters. If you're looking for fighty Covens, then this might be a decent route, but I think at least in game these guys might not be the most popular pick. Generally much of the Drukhari Codex does melee incredibly well, and I'm not sure that just an extra -1 AP really makes the racks quite get there. I'm not sure how much point there is in building fighty homunculi either, when Archons and Succubi just do it so much better as well. For me, this might be a bit more of a fun and fluffy pick for a Coven, rather than a top-tier competitive one. Finally, we come to the custom Covens. Again, there's plenty more minor ones in the backstory, or you can make their own. One that stood out to me was the Hex. They're a Coven who pride themselves on the spectacle, leaving a gory, dramatic spectacle of death behind when they attack. Then when horrified survivors emerge to see the carnage, they feast upon their terror, before turning them into a gory spectacle as well. All very nice. Compared with the custom Kabals and Cults, I think that the custom Covens are actually far more competitive. In particular, the one that stands out that loads of people have been running are Dark Technomancers. This is the one with the funky rules to overcharge weapons, where you can overcharge a weapon for +1 to wound and +1 damage, but if you roll any 1s to hit, then you take 1 mortal wound, or D3 if you happen to be a vehicle. The reason that this is so strong is that you can use it on liquefy guns, strength 4 AP-1 flamer weapons, and of course they don't roll to hit, so you have no chance of overheating and killing yourself. Racks armed with liquefy guns are pretty good anti-everything shooting units. For 60 points they can put an insane amount of hurt on whatever they target. To be honest, aside from liquefy spam, the other options are quite interesting too. Artists of Flesh gives you -1 damage, and that could be a really good choice for something like Talos or Grotesques, as it can actually make them a real struggle to remove. Finally, you can combine a couple of melee ones. If you do want melee Covens, then you can get the quite nice combo of +1 strength and exploding 6s in melee. That's 2 really quite decent buffs there, and if you do just want fighty monsters, it might be better to go with that combo compared with the Coven of 12. Overall, out of the homunculus Covens, the strongest picks are quite likely Dark Technomancers, Dark Crees, and Prophets of Flesh, though those other custom Coven ones are pretty interesting too. So anyway, that just about brings us to the end of our tour through Kabals, Cults and Covens for the Drukhari, and it's certainly been fun to take a closer look at them. If you have any other insights as to which are your favourites and why, please let me know down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I will certainly be keeping the 40k content coming on the channel, with new videos coming out pretty much every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying these videos, I would just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description. Making all this content, particularly big comparison videos like this, does take an enormous amount of time, and if you are enjoying regularly, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few rewards, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry to the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.